Alright guys, Murphs here, and today I want to talk about going through the process of patterning a shotgun. What are some of the factors that will have an impact on the pattern of your shotgun, as well as why it is important to pattern shotguns. Now guys, what's important to keep in mind? What is patterning a shotgun? What does that mean? Well, patterning for shotguns is kind of like what zeroing for rifles is. Now it's not 100% a one for one. If you have a shotgun that has adjustable sights or an optic of some type set on it, then you have to go through the normal zeroing process like you would with any other rifle. However, for a lot of your sporting type guns, be it waterfowl, rabbit, turkey, whatever it may be, where you're primarily using shotgun shot in order to be able to make those engagements, you're not necessarily looking to zero those as much as you're looking to see how the shotgun performs with a given load at a set distance. Now, to some extent, also understanding where the center mass of your shot is going to be is very important as well. And some of that comes down to being able to gauge where it is or how it is that you should line up the sight on your shotgun, as well as where that load is going to kind of favor. So a lot of times, let's say you have a bead sight on your shotgun, a single bead, like on this Winchester Model 1200 chambered in 12 gauge, previously discussed on the channel. Link in the description. I have a single bead on this particular shotgun. So let's say that I line it up out at the range and I decide that I'm going to place that bead flush with the top of the receiver. I send that round down range. I go down and check it and I find that it's impacting a little low. So now I know that I need to set the bead on top of the receiver, and then I know that I'm going to have a good center mass engagement out of my shotgun. Now, what we're ultimately looking to do is to see as to whether or not we are getting enough impacts at the distance that we want to engage at on the target that we want to engage. And there are a lot of things that are going to impact how that shot pattern gets formed overall. Now, the least amount of impact is probably barrel length. With modern propellants, modern powders, and all that kind of stuff, anything beyond 22 inches is getting the maximum amount of velocity that it's going to get out of a particular load. Any longer barrel than that is a personal preference as far as how the shotgun swings through the target and all that kind of stuff if you're in a waterfowl type condition. And it's not terribly helpful to have a longer barrel in defensive type encounters. Now, that's not to say that there isn't an impact in barrel length as much as it's to say that barrel length is not going to give you greater range or a guarantee of tighter shot patterns or any of those types of things. It just is a characteristic that still, I mean, the shot still has to travel down the barrel. So there's still some implication of barrel length, but it is not a defining factor. However, something like chamber length, this does actually play a part. Now, of course, if you have a 3.5 inch chambered gun, you can chamber shorter cartridges, and that's the same pretty much all throughout unless otherwise specified by the manufacturer. However, that can have an impact on how your shot column formulates. It's kind of like the same deal in rifle bullets, where a lot of times hand loaders will try to seat the rifle bullet a little bit higher in the actual cartridge neck so that it engages the rifling sooner, so you have less bullet jump, and that's supposed to have an impact on accuracy. It's kind of the same deal with shorter cartridges and longer chambers. If you have a 3.5 inch chambered shotgun and you put a 2 3/4 inch shell, it's not unsafe. It's not going to cause the gun to come from together or anything along those lines, but your shot column is going to have to travel a little bit further to actually make it into the barrel and go on down range through the choke and all that kind of stuff, and that's going to change the overall dynamic of how your shot pattern formulates. So generally, it's better to pair the length of shell all the way to the maximum length of the shotgun chamber. So if you have a 3.5 inch shell, you're going to get supposedly better patterns out of a 3.5. If you have 3.5 inch chamber, you're going to get better patterns out of a 3.5 inch shell than you will out of a 2 3/4 inch shell. So if you had a Remington 870 with a 3 inch chamber and a Remington 870 with a 3.5 inch chamber, you would see that a 3 inch and both of those would pattern differently, potentially would pattern very differently, and you might get a better result out of the actual 3 inch chambered gun. Now, going from there, probably one of the biggest impacts is choke. Especially since there's a wide variance in chokes. Even though modified, cylinder, all those types of chokes have a specified dimension to them, it doesn't mean that there's not a little bit of gray area as to what constitutes that. It's more of a spectrum than it is like a designated actual dimension. So with that being the case, you have some manufacturers that are a little tighter than others. And then also the type of choke that you're utilizing. Are you utilizing a fixed choke, like found in this Remington, or excuse me, this Winchester Model 1200, or do you have a rem choke like found in this Remington Model 1100, previously reviewed on the channel? Versus wind choke and vector choke tubes, all those different types of things. There's tons of different types of aftermarket chokes you can get out there that will change the constriction and a lot of the dynamics involved in compressing your shot or allowing it to be more open, whatever it is that you're trying to get out of that particular choke tube. And that's going to have a massive effect on your pattern at any given distance. And then ultimately, the shot, the actual shell, the loading that you're putting through the barrel is going to massively change how your patterning dynamic works out. Shot size, shot material, velocity, all those types of things are going to play a major role in how the shot pattern formulates. So much so that a number 4 Federal may not necessarily pattern in a similar Winchester loading. So with all these combinations, we find that each shotgun winds up becoming an individual, especially when you start to talk about choke. And if somebody's been running a lot of slugs through a little bit tighter choke, there's a good possibility that that choke has started to open up a little bit. That's going to change that dynamic. It's going to be something that's going to be very difficult to account for. And that's why it is so important to test your shotgun with a given load, to go out there and pattern it so you know for sure you're getting the dynamic that it is that you want to get out of it. Now, the parameters that you want to set for whenever you go and pattern something is going to be, you need a target, you need a given size for your target, you need a distance that you expect to be able to use that load at, and then you also need to figure out what a successful engagement is going to look like. So a waterfowler might want 4 impacts in vital areas in order to be able to consider, at a given distance, in order to be able to consider that to be a good shot selection for his particular shotgun. Whereas the requirements for a turkey hunter might be a little bit different, or someone in a defensive type scenario using buckshot might have a different expectation for what type of performance they're going to get out of that load. It's all about what your expectations are and then what parameters you set for success. So that being the case, I decided to go ahead and kind of demonstrate this out of the range in a non-scientific environment. Guys, keep that in mind. This is just a broad strokes discussion and example of how it is to go through patterning. So I took these 2 shotguns. The Remington Model 1100 has a rem choke system, and I have a improved cylinder choke installed. And the 1200 is a fixed modified choke. They're both 12 gauge, of course. And I was going to test them with the same loads. I brought out the Remington Model 1100 specifically to kind of be a control, because I know for sure that improved cylinder patterns 12 gauge buckshot pretty well. However, I've not necessarily run a lot of buckshot through modified chokes. So, what were the results? Well, I started off with this Fetter 2 3/4 inch buckshot. Double out buck, of course. I cannot help but notice that there is no velocity listed on here, so I have no idea what speed this is moving at. I decided that the distance that I would engage at would be 35 yards. And my target would be this particular target here. And the idea is that I'm just looking for impacts on this page, because as you'll notice, that is roughly upper chest and a little bit down further in the torso. But for sure, if I get a good pattern on this, I can expect that I'm going to have good hits on the upper chest area of a target, which is kind of where I want my buckshot to go as it is. And this is for defensive type purposes. All right, so I started off with the Fetter out of the Winchester Model 1200, and at 35 yards, I got 3 impacts on the paper. Now, keep in mind, guys, buckshot is between 32 and 33 caliber projectiles, 8 to 9 of them. And 3 out of 8 is not a very good impact concentration, in my opinion. This is not a terribly good pattern. Specifically because I've got 5 32 caliber projectiles that just went somewhere. I don't know where, but we're sitting here around like 30% impact, and I've got to account for those other hits. for those other projectiles. That's something that I find a little bit concerning about this particular dynamic here. So then I took that fetter load and I tested it in the Remington Model 1100, and I got 4 impacts at 35 yards out of an improved cylinder choke. See them right here. Well, it's a little bit better. We're now at roughly 50% impact. However, I still have some shot flying out there that did not hit the intended target. Kind of going back to, you know, fundamentals of firearms safety and all that kind of stuff. You got to know your target and beyond, and you're accountable for every shot. So I potentially injured somebody else in this defensive type scenario with this fetter load. So we know right off the bat, this is not necessarily matching up with what it is that I want it to do. So at this point, I switched over to this 2-net tactical buckshot, which contains 9 pellets and is moving at 1,300 feet per second. I ran this out of the Winchester Model 1200, and I actually managed... It's the wrong target. I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. There we go. And I actually managed to get all 8 impacts on the target. There's a pretty high concentration of 4 impacts up on this side where I have the writing, but across this page, I wound up with 8 impacts. That's pretty good. I appreciate that. Now, to some extent, guys, if I had shot multiple times for each load, maybe I could have gotten a little bit better representation. However, at the very least, in these testing conditions, I got a fair shake with the Winchester Model 1200 and the loads that were being tested, because they each only got 1 opportunity in order to be able to reflect what type of patterns they were going to give us. And right off the bat, the 2-net is giving us a much better pattern. So I can go ahead and expect to continue to see that trend in the positive. Now guys, this is not meant to be an example that fetter is an inferior ammunition or that 2-net is the best thing in the world. That's not what I'm trying to talk about right now. All I'm trying to cover is that I got a better pattern going through the process that we discussed earlier, and with all the implications that we discussed. Both of these are 2 3/4 inch chambers, so they're matched appropriately to their shells. I got a better engagement dynamic out of the 2-net at 35 yards than I did out of the fetter. That's the end state. You guys do with that information what you will. I'm not trying to tell you what it is that you need to do. All right, guys. Well, that's pretty much an example and the process that goes through and discusses how to pattern your shotgun. I hope you guys found this interesting overall. I've got links to both of these shotguns as well as some other shotgun discussion stuff that we've had on the channel. So if you want to get involved in more of that, barrel lengths, slugs, all those types of things, go ahead and check out the description. And that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.